Welcome everybody to our professional development webinar. Today is January 24th, 2025, and we are happy to have both TESOL members and non-members in this group. It'd be wonderful if you wouldn't mind typing into the chat. Introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us your name and location and what levels you teach. And since today's topic is about word stress, what do you want to learn about word stress? If this is your first time attending a topic webinar, enter first timer in there too. Okay, so as you know, today's event is called Corpus-Informed Priorities for Teaching Word Stress, and we're going to have DJ Kaiser talk to us about his recent research and what he's going to do to implement that, or what he's in process of doing for us to use in our classrooms. But before we do that, we're going to say a little bit about who is hosting this webinar. So we are TESOL Topic. We are teachers of pronunciation. So we're really passionate about pronunciation, listening, and speaking. And we have an interest group where we try to have a webinar every month if we're not already meeting in person at a conference. So we hope that you will join us every month. You can join us, teachers of pronunciation. So we're really passionate about pronunciation, listening, and speaking. And we have an interest group where we try to have a webinar every month if we're not already meeting in person at a conference. So we hope that you will join us every month. You can join us as a member of TESOL, and we can communicate through the message board TESOL Top at TESOL.org. Also, if you are a Facebook member, then you can join the top group and find us there and get notice about some of the webinars that are coming up and other topics of interest. We are also co-hosted by the Corpus-Informed Research and Teaching Interest Group. So we have our co-coordinators here. Margie Wald, you can say hi. And
Ellie.
Good.
Hi, Kuznetsova. You don't have to try it.
No, we can try. We're trying. We like pronunciation.
They are the pronunciation people, right? Exactly.
Yes,
do you want to introduce? Do you want to say anything about the CURT IG, Ellie?
Sure. We're hosting usually events on corpus-related topics. We invite PhD students, sometimes scholars, if we find those who are willing to work with us and have time. So if you ever want to join us at the corpus-related events, we don't have yet anything planned, but stay tuned. We will.
Right, we're looking at something for February, right?
Yeah. If you ever want to join, please do. We will be happy to have you there.
And I'll put a couple of links in the chat to help you navigate to some of the top things and some of the CURT IG things. But we are very excited because I think this is an underrepresented area of corpus study, and that's how we can use corpora for something like pronunciation. So I'm very excited to be co-hosting this with the top group. So welcome, everybody.
You can see that we do have a Padlet for each of our interest groups. Here's the one for Corpus. How about looking at our top Padlet? This is teaching of pronunciation for people interested in following us on our Padlet, which includes a lot of our previous recordings and slide presentations and conference information from previous years. And it also has a link to our other interest groups, because TESOL has a lot of interest groups, and we are just two of them. We are the best two of the many interest groups.
Completely objective opinion there.
Of course. Yeah. Okay. And in order to invite you to our total TESOL, you could also come to our YouTube channel. So if you subscribe to our channel on YouTube, then you can also get a lot of recordings from levels, chapters, and interest groups at TESOL. TESOL is a big organization, over 50 years old, and one of the best, one of the earliest TESOL affiliates. Okay, well, we've seen DJ pretty often. Actually, DJ reminded me that he joined TESOL in 2002 way back when he was a toddler, maybe, and he came to a PCI that I was giving with Bill Acton and a few other pronunciation geeks, right? Way back then. So DJ and I have known each other for a little while. And we also show up not only at TESOL, but at the PSLLT, as you can see here, with my co-host, Patrick. Say hi, Pat.
Hi, everyone.
So we were pleased to get together in Ames, Iowa. Was it last September? And there is
That sounds right. Yep.
DJ doing his presentation on word stress. And we said, you know what? We need to see him in person, more or less in person, actively here with us at TESOL. So I'm really very nicely pleased to present to you DJ Kaiser, now at Webster University, right?
Yes.
Yes. So, and so much, such a wonderful background he has of being degreed in linguistics and Spanish and ESL and having his doctorate where he specializes in a lot of things that we love, pronunciation included. So how about I give it over to you and you can tell us more about you and your project of Corpus-Informed priorities.
All right. So just want to make sure everyone can see the full slide on the screen.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, great. So yes, I'm at Webster University. So I'm professor and director of our TESOL program and do some other roles at my university. Just brief background related to this. I first studied English phonetics and phonology at the University of Barcelona as an international student. So that's how it started. Then did my BA in linguistics, also in Spanish, and then my TESOL at the University of Illinois. So those of you who are familiar with the University of Illinois program probably know Wayne B. Dickerson. So I was trained to be one of his teaching assistants for teaching pronunciation. Through that, I got to know his book, Stress in the Speech Stream, and then Han and Dickerson's book, Speechcraft. So if you're familiar with those, that will help give you a background of where I was coming from in my approach with word stress. Then I ended up teaching at Washington University in St. Louis and developed 2 advanced pronunciation courses. So that was a very unique opportunity for me to work with advanced learners and divide out different skills for that. So I've got a book that will be coming out called Practical Pronunciation. It's under contract with the University of Michigan Press. It's very close to being done. I started developing these materials back in 2001. So I've been with these materials for almost a quarter of a century, which is amazing to think. There are actually 2 sets of materials. The one that I'm going to be focused on is the book that focuses on supersegmentals, which also integrates some segmentals into that. So it's this practical strategies book. So I taught this for many years at Washington University to English learners. And then when I moved to Webster University and started teaching TESOL, I also taught these materials as a text for teachers to prepare them to teach pronunciation. And I do want to give a special thanks to Marnie Reed. She's actually the person who pushed me to submit my manuscript to the University of Michigan Press. I just feel if I didn't say that, I have to say that. So special thanks to her. And I just want to give a disclaimer. I'm so happy to see a combination of pronunciation and corpus people. I am not a corpus expert. So I would love to hear perspectives. So afterwards, would love to hear about that. So for this project, I focused on an easily accessible corpus tool and COCA. So COCA is what I used. I'll mention the BNC, the British National Corpus, and talk about just some uses of that. And a big part of that is my goal is for corpus applications to be really accessible for teachers and for students. And so this, if you don't know much about corpora, this is something that you could do, although it took a long time to do it, and I'll talk about that. So let's talk about word stress rules, just as kind of a primer. So Dickerson has 4 word stress rules that are from Stress in the Speech Stream, back from the 1980s. And these 4 rules appeared in a revised manner in Han and Dickerson's Speechcraft, which came out in 1999. Then there are many textbooks that cover word stress rules. then just kind of going on the other side of the spectrum in terms of number of rules. So this article from TESOL Journal from Siddharth Tarini looks at 16 word stress rules based on Coxhead's academic word lists. So that was another approach that I looked at where people were looking at word stress. And so different authors will look at this differently, where they'll have rules, they'll have tendencies, they'll have recommendations, and then others will just ignore word stress prediction because word stress, it is not the easiest thing to teach. And students often find, I want a rule for everything, and there isn't a rule for everything. So we look at what we can teach and make priorities. So my approach to word stress when I started developing my materials 25 years ago is I wanted to maintain the identification of spelling patterns because these are things that learners are able to identify more easily. But I didn't want to require the analysis of syllable structure. So a lot of the research on word stress for English will also look at heavy and light syllables, whether syllable is open and closed. So you have to do this analysis in order to determine word stress using some of these rules. So I made a conscious decision to not go this direction with my materials. What I do include, though, is identification of affixes. So strong prefixes, and you'll hear me talk about strong prefixes, and then also what I call ignorable endings. And I'm going to pull up just in the window here chat. I may not be able to follow along with the chat, but I'll make sure at the end we've got time for questions. Okay, so let's go back. In 2002, this was the word stress rules or the system that I was using. And they could go into 3 different columns. So stress the ending with these strong endings. The stress is 1 back from the identified spelling pattern, or the stress is 2 back from the identified spelling pattern. And you could just take a moment to see the number of spelling patterns that are here for students to memorize and for them to learn to use for these word stress rules. And we're going to see that some revision happened to this system after I did this analysis using COCA. And so I taught this for pretty much 2 decades without questions about it. And I'm grateful that the question came up, and we'll talk about these changes. So with working on practical pronunciation, I was really comfortable with the materials and was talking with my editor. And she made the recommendation that we send out a near complete revision of the book for another review. So I got some anonymous feedback. And I'm just going to share a few things from this feedback. So glad the unit on word stress is focusing on only 5 rules. However, I wonder why these rules were chosen. Good question. And then this exercise has several very uncommon words or forms of words that would not normally be used. Gynocentric, Aristotelic, Labrosaurid. Why not find more common words? So think about that. Keep that comment in your head, and we'll see kind of how I've addressed that. And then I wonder how often this word stress rule works. Can you provide any statistics? It doesn't seem very common to me, but that's just my intuition. And I think many of us in teaching a number of these things, we do use our intuition. And so this comment on statistics really stuck with me. And again, I've been using these rules for more than 20 years. And this was the first time the question came up. And it came up at, I think, a good time before you publish, when you have opportunities to make changes to things. So enter the corpus. So I know we've got people from who know a lot more about corpora than I do. So I worked with COCA, which is the Corpus of Contemporary American English. And our TESOL program uses this. So we prepare our teachers to use the COCA in different ways. It's free. There are some daily limits. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And just from their website, more than 1 billion words of text over multiple decades and from 8 different genres. So this is what I chose because My book focuses on North American English, and so it made sense for me to use COCA to get the words that I was going to work with. And so this is just a quick screenshot for those of you who may not be familiar with COCA. So the process I used was I searched for specific spelling patterns. So I already had the spelling patterns that I've been using in my materials. And so asterisk IC was going to find words that ended in IC. Asterisk UA asterisk would pull up words that had UA in the word, so it could be beginning, middle, or end. So I went through with all the different spelling patterns I had to identify words. So I looked for words, not lemmas, that may be stressed by one of these word stress rules. I made a decision to only include words with a frequency of 100 or greater. So lower frequency words for COCA, I did not include. And I had to make a decision somewhere, and I felt comfortable with 100. And then I put these words into an Excel document and then marked the words with the spelling patterns that fit the rule or didn't fit the rule. So then the question becomes, so how do you verify the pronunciation of these words? I spent months. I spent months going through these words, and I used the Oxford English Dictionary to see how they were putting the stress on these words. There were a lot of proper nouns and proper adjectives, and I'll talk about the role of proper nouns and adjectives because that plays a major role with this. So I used Youglish a lot. If you're not familiar with Youglish, I'll show you what that is with a screenshot and talk about that. And in some cases, I needed to use names, oftentimes people's last name. And so I would find videos of them introducing themselves or someone else introducing them where I would be able to find what the pronunciation was, what the word stress was for those. So things that I excluded in my my Excel sheet were plurals. So I just left out plurals. This included leaving out third person singular of the present tense for verbs. Compound nouns I excluded because those have a different type of stress rule for them. Words with hyphens. I was amazed at just how many words with hyphens came up in with more than 100 instances. One syllable words, and then words with no or not enough syllables to the left of the spelling pattern. So with these words, especially when we've got one back and two back, you need syllables that are one or two to the left of that in order for the rule to work. So if there weren't enough syllables, those did get excluded. I also excluded abbreviations. So abbreviations for epidemiology and physiology. So these came up more than 100 times, and I had to address that. And then there were non-English words that came up that weren't borrowed words, so such as these Latin words of veritate, trinitate, and then words with strong prefixes. So this came up, and I'll talk about this more, and this actually turned into another analysis. So just when I thought I was done with one analysis using COCA, then I did another analysis. And I'll briefly talk about that. I didn't have time to include that in this talk. So initial discoveries was that my stress rule number one, the strong endings, stressed relatively few words. So there were 89 words that appeared 100 times or more, and 85 of those were stressed by this stress rule. So I had to make a decision. Do I use this stress rule anymore for my book? And then some spelling patterns appeared less frequently in the COCA data. So words ending in ID, so the IU spelling pattern and the ACY spelling pattern. I also found that there were more strong prefixes that appeared in the data. So I'd already been teaching strong prefixes through my materials, and I had a list of 16 that I was teaching. Through these data, that list expanded to 75. That's a dramatic expansion from 16 to 75 when looking at data from COCA. So some decisions that I made based on this is stress rule number 1, the strong endings, was removed from the system, and that was added to the appendix. So Appendix B of the book is a review of word stress rules and then has additional content on word stress. So I decided to put that there. So it's still being used, but it's not part of the word stress system. Then less frequent spelling patterns were removed from the remaining 4 word stress rules. So that IU, I removed that. The ACY, I removed that. The ID, I removed. So this ended up simplifying the system for learners. And then I was able to focus on only the more common spelling patterns. And then coverage of strong prefixes was expanded, and it's received its own appendix. So I wrote it as a mini lesson so that instructors could decide where they wanted to put that within their course, or just leave it as optional within the appendix. But I do believe strong prefixes are quite important. So this is now the revised word stress rule system that I'm working with. So I've got the back 1 rules and the back 2 rules. So with the back 2 rules, I like to talk about terminators. Terminators, I'll be back to from the terminator, these endings. So we get ickle for word stress rule number 1. For word stress rule number 2, we've got IA, IO, UA, and UO. Then with the back 2 rules, word stress rule number 3, ATE, ATOR. And so ATE will include ATED, ATING, and ATES. And then word stress rule number 4 for long Y words. You have to watch for words that are CY, RY, and LY. And in my appendix, I talk about that. But then if you have an I that's derived from the Y, those will also fit into this. So can you provide any statistics? So I like to think of this more as data. And so these data show the number of words for each of these word stress rules, how many of them were stressed by the rule, and then how many exceptions. So I was able to come up with different percentages. So the 4 rules together, we get 93.7% effective. So 93.7% of the time on these words that appeared more than 100 times in COCA, the stress rules would work. The other percent, it would be an exception. And certain rules would work more. So word stress rule number 1 and number 3, those have a higher percentage. And word stress rule number 4 has a lower percentage. So then I decided to look at the data and break it down a bit more. As I was looking at those that fit the rule and those that didn't fit the rule, I found that more of the exceptions were proper nouns and proper adjectives. So I went back through all the data and marked them for common and for proper. And then I was disaggregating those and then looked at the data again. So now let's take a look at common words, as I call them, just common words. So these are the non-proper nouns and adjectives. So we're going to see these percentages go up. So we went from 93.7% overall to 96.4%. So that's going up overall. We see now that all these percentages for each of the rules now is above 94%. It's even a little bit higher for word stress rule number 1, which is already at 99%. So all these go up. Now let's take a look at this in contrast to proper nouns and proper adjectives. So now we see the efficacy of these word stress rules goes down overall to 78.5%. We see that the number of words is fewer, but considering we've got around 8,000 words, we've got 1,226 of these proper nouns and proper adjectives. So there's still a significant number of them. And we've got a low rate with word stress rule number 3, few words, and so word stress rules number 3 and 4, they're really not that effective. It's almost like 50-50, a bit above 50-50 of working. But having data just helps us look at these. And then we could just compare these. So putting the common versus proper next to each other, we could start to see how these percentages are different in terms of the efficacy of using these word stress rules. I also took data and put it into Tableau. I'm just a big fan of Tableau. I like to visualize data. So this is just another way of looking at it, where those that fit the rule on the top, those that are exceptions, and then having common versus proper. So we could just see those numbers, but also visualized. Then I did another pass and looked at the actual spelling pattern or the ending that was there to see which ones were appearing more. So we see here the largest one with more than 2,000, more than 2,200 is the IO. So when we look at the word stress rule number 2 with IO, UA, and UO, IO appeared most, and the one that appeared the least was the UO. So I could have made a decision to remove that, but I liked the parity of IA, IO, UA, UO because it's easy to remember for students. But then others, when we look at long Y, that shows up quite a bit. And then the IED, that didn't show up quite as much. If we added in IES, then that number would have gone up. But I did exclude plurals from my analysis. So that's why that number is going to be lower where we've got words that the Y turns into an I. So what do these data show us? So each of the revised word stress rules can stress more than 1,000 different English words that appear at least 100 times in COCA. So I want you to go back and think about my original word stress rule number 1, the strong endings, where that was less than 100 words. So when you set that bar at 1,000 words for a word stress rule, to have it be a priority of it being covered in one of the chapters of my book, there's a huge difference between more than 1,000 and then less than 100. And then word stress rule number 2 can stress more than 4,400 words. So that would make this a higher priority stress rule. And then students should know that proper nouns and proper adjectives have higher exception rates. So this is something that we can teach our learners, and that these common words will have a higher accuracy rate. So some additional uses of these data. So as mentioned before, the anonymous reviewer gave feedback on several of the practice items. So I had one quote there, but there were comments throughout of things that needed to be updated. And so keeping in mind that a lot of these practice items I had written in 2001, 2002. And so this was an opportunity to revise those, update them. And so I would go through the lists of the lists of words that I had for the word stress rules, and then I could use those as I was revising my when I had lists of words. So when we're doing segmental practice of va versus va, or practicing with R and L, I could pick words that were in my Excel file that were stressed by these word stress rules. And then as I'm writing sentences to practice, I could also include words that can be stressed by these word stress rules. And I could choose from higher frequency words. And then I would alert learners that some of the words in the practices could be stressed by rules that they had learned in the book. So just one quick example here. So this is an old version. Do you like soup? Only tomato soup. I'm allergic to chicken. So allergic would be stressed by one of these rules. Chocolate would be. But then taking a look, what kind of solution? So solution would be stressed by one of the rules. Basic, acidic, actually. Then we get volatility, fluctuate, historical, analytics. So now we're getting more words that are coming from, so overall, I like these dialogues better, but they're also integrating word stress practice, even though it's not the focus of this particular activity. So I created an appendix on word stress rules, as I mentioned before. And so this appendix was expanded based on the data. And so the data charts that I showed earlier in these slides are actually in this appendix. So you can just see how many words. And so that, do you have statistics? It's like, I've got data. So let's just show the data. What also really helped was being able to look at exceptions and have them all together. And when it was possible, I could group different exceptions. And I could also list exceptions based on their frequency. So those that appeared earlier in the list showed up more frequently in the COCA data. And then exceptions that appear less than 100 times in COCA were removed. So I had a list of some exceptions, and I removed a lot of those words, even though they were exceptions, because they didn't show up as much. So I wanted some consistency there. So here are two different examples. So looking at proper nouns that are exceptions to word stress rule number 2. Now, there were so many exceptions to word stress rule number 2, I actually limited it to only those that appeared 1,000 times or more. And so I actually marked that in this appendix and then go in order. So Ohio came up the most, and then Indiana, and then going on down. Then when it came to exceptions to word stress rule number 4, so these are these long Y words, there were these endings that we could put together. So archy, so patriarchy, oligarchy, matriarchy, doxy, so orthodoxy, heterodoxy, and mony with testimony, ceremony, alimony, and so on. So rather than just having a list of exceptions, I was able to put them together more easily into categories when that would work for particular exceptions. Then I mentioned ignorable endings before. So I had a list of 16 of these ignorable endings. And just so you know, I use some terms in the book that are not the terms that I learned in my linguistics degree. My concern is making pronunciation content more or easier for students to understand, and also easier for teachers who may not have as much of a background in linguistics. So I use this term ignorable endings. These are endings that don't affect the word stress of a root or the word that it's attached to. So that plural S, your ly ending to turn an adjective into an adverb would be ignorable endings. And so my list of 16 ignorable endings then expanded to 28. So some and ship, hood, these were words that came up through the analysis. So a lot of things happened through the analysis of these words from this COCA analysis. So then why use a written corpus for teaching pronunciation? There are spoken corpora. The issue is, well, this was a lot easier to use and I was going to get more words. And in my experience, and especially when I was teaching at Washington University, I was working with medical researchers, PhD candidates, and they would come in with articles with words that they had to pronounce because they had to teach a class or they had to give a presentation. So a lot of our learners are encountering these words through reading, but then they have to talk about it. Also, the use of a corpus, it helped me shift away from teaching my favorite words or words that were more obscure. And so more obscure words, learners may not find them as often. So the corpus really helped me prioritize those words to use. So I want to talk a little bit about teacher use of corpora. So teachers can create their own materials by running their own searches. And I'll show just a few slides, things that you can do. And so I'll show in COCA, you can search by part of speech. So if you're looking for words that could be stressed by word stress rule number 3, that should be word stress. No, it is word stress rule number 3. So higher frequency nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. So these are different searches that you can do. So the ATE with where it's a verb, here it's a noun. And then I limited it to academic. So I'm going to be pulling from fewer words, but then I will be able to find verbs that appear in academic texts that have this ATE ending, and then the same for ATE for nouns. Then for adjectives and adverbs, the search is a little bit different with the ADJ is what I found. And then I just used ATELEY for adverbs because that's what the spelling would be. And then just showing what some of these results would be. Now create, because there aren't two syllables to the left of the ATE I wouldn't use, but indicate comes up the most. And we get participate, demonstrate. So right away, some words are coming up that could be used for putting together materials. The same for nouns. More 1 and 2 syllable words here, so you have to go down more in the list. But then here you get those frequency counts. So these were the frequency counts that I used when I was determining which words I would then look at to figure out which ones could be stressed or not be stressed. So these frequency counts were what I used. Then I'm a big proponent of helping students learn how to use corpora. And so in our TESOL program, we teach our teachers how to then teach their students how to use corpora, and we work with COCA. I ended up writing a new appendix for my book called Digital Tools for Pronunciation Learning, and have recommendations for using COCA, and then also for using Youglish. And I'll talk about the intersection of COCA and Youglish, and then the BNC and Youglish, so the British National Corpus. So with this, you can help learners identify words that may be stressed by these stress rules, looking up by the spelling patterns, and then having them link to Youglish. And I'll show you what that looks like. You can have them focus their search on academic words, words from the newspaper. You can have academic medicine, academic humanities, so that will change where the frequency of words and which words would be prioritized doing those searches. So in my appendix, I have this chart of different searches that can be done, showing you where the asterisks would go. And then here I'm just showing you the BNC, the British National Corpus. The user interface is the same as COCA. But what I want to show here is when you run a search, if you then click on pronunciation video, so right here, then what you can do is if you click on one of these words, and so let's say that I've clicked on the word financial, it's going to take you to Youglish, and then you'll be able to watch different videos. And here there are more than 100,000 videos or 100,000 clips where in videos you will hear speakers using this word. So now students are identifying words, and then they're able to hear various speakers pronouncing that word within context. And they've got the transcript that's there. I just love this combination of these tools together. Just a reminder, though, is that COCA and the BNC and Youglish. So what I like about these is that they are free. However, you're limited to a certain number of searches per day. And so you may need to ask students to engage with these tools on a daily basis so that they don't exceed the daily limits. We're having an interesting challenge in Uzbekistan, which is where my program also operates, where we've got more than 1,300 students now. And if everyone's on campus and using this, even though they have their own, those daily limits, they've figured out that you're using it and they'll shut you down. So be aware of that if you have a lot of students using this, is that daily limits are not just for individuals, but also for groups. So if you make using these tools part of an assignment, make sure that you give extra time and make the expectations realistic based on the free limits, and also assume that students will be making errors in some of their searches. So make sure that you reduce that amount. So if you could do 50 daily, you don't want to say look up 40 words because they may have 10 that aren't good. I would keep that down to 10, 5 or 10 in a day. So just keep that in mind. So just some reflections here, and then we'll have time for questions. So I will say getting feedback so late in the textbook editing process, it wasn't easy at first, but I am so much happier with the end results. And the end results are just so much stronger. As I'm going through and I'm doing a reading of each lesson, and I'm just like, wow, this is just so much stronger. And I see the work of this corpus analysis, where I was doing it for this one thing of word stress, and then it turned into more things. And then I use these words to inform all my exercises throughout. And it's been amazing. So here, simple use of COCA and Excel changed my priorities. I will say this was lengthy. I mean, this was months of work. My husband would say, how much work do you have left on your words? And I would say, well, okay, I got done with this list. And he's like, okay, great, come down to dinner. But so it took a lot of time, but man, it was really worth it. And so the resulting database of words gave me words, I mentioned this, to pull from. So I'm really happy now with the segmental practice, different dialogues, example sentences, because I was really able to incorporate more words in that sense. So just a final thought, this process was both humbling and empowering. So again, these were word stress rules that I've been teaching for a long time. And it was humbling to see, okay, so some of what I was teaching, they weren't as high of a priority, but it ended up feeling more empowering because I had data to back up decisions that were in the book. And I'm so glad that I did this before it came out and is published. And so just a little bit about practical pronunciation. So it will be coming out from the University of Michigan Press. So check back later 2025, maybe into 2026. I know it just takes a while. And I know we've got people on here who've done textbooks, so you know, and maybe you'll tell me what is a realistic expectation of how long it will take. But there are 12 lessons combining supersegmental and segmental instruction with a focus on supersegmentals. There's more than 4.5 hours of audio content. I actually had recorded most of my materials, and then I had to revise all of these materials, and I ended up re-recording everything. And then there will be approximately 30 videos. That's the next thing that I need to do. And then there's 7 appendices with additional and advanced coverage of pronunciation topics. One of those focuses on stress on strong prefixes. And then another one is on the word stress rules with a lot of exceptions, and then other things to consider with word stress. And then that last appendix on digital tools. And then just some references that I mentioned in this presentation. And then please stay safe, everyone, where you're at. If you have additional questions, my email is just my name at webster.edu, djkaiser.webster.edu. And I do want to give a special thanks to Marcia and Patrick. And so it was just great, giving this poster presentation and then being asked, can you do this as a webinar? And so it was a lot of fun putting this together. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so that we could see each other. And yay, I went at a good enough speed where there's time where we can have questions.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, DJ. That was absolutely wonderful to hear what the process was and how you used data to help us understand which of the words that are used in this language, which are always so troublesome for learners, are rule-based and are pattern-based, and teasing out the things that are more important than others and prioritizing for us in a way that will really make it easier for both teachers and students. I think now we have questions that you'd like to ask, and go ahead and unmute yourself and say hello.
Hey, DJ. Patrick Hogan here out in California. Thank you so much. Super appreciate what you did with COCA there. I've been a fan of it for years and great, great job. Um, do you have like a web page, this synopsis of some of these highlights or rules, or are you saving it until it's published in your textbook and then having access as a resource, not necessarily ready to teach a full class on something like this, but
No, good question. So I did this analysis very specifically for the textbook because through that anonymous review process, that was the feedback that I received. It was great feedback. I mean, so much of the feedback I got was great feedback. This was the one that took the most time, and I'm on a timeline of I'm scheduled to be in South America in a little less than 2 months for 2 months of research. So I want this done before I get on the plane. So I've been rushing. So my priority right now is get the manuscript done and then publish an article on this. So by doing an article that's on this, that summarizes this, then it will have these word stress rules in a standalone article where people will be able to use that. It'll have the data, the rules to look at, but then what practical pronunciation will have is you've got in one of the lessons the overview of the 4 word stress rules after you talk about just what's word stress initially. And then with each lesson, you go through word stress rule number 1, and then the next one, word stress rule number 2. It's one of several topics that's within it, a review, and then you've got the appendix, and then the exercises throughout that integrate those words and kind of remind you to look for those. So that's that. So right now it's not available because it's available through this webinar, and then what I did in Iowa at the PSLT session, and I had a one-pager there where it had that, but it will be much easier to work with once it's in the textbook or the published article. This is kind of the slides basis, but it's been good for me to go through and just double check and that. But great question.
Okay, and if I may, just something help me learn. You use the term strong prefix, and I'm actually not familiar with that.
Okay. No, thanks for asking that. So there are a lot of books and a lot of materials that will say words only have one strong syllable or only one primary stress. And there are actually a lot of words that commonly can have 2 strong syllables, 2 primary stresses. And that's words that will have these strong prefixes. So re. So re meaning again. So when you say reanalyze, so there we go, socio-emotional. So that's socio. So socio is one of those. And so I'm analyzing words, and it comes down to, do you have 1 or 2 syllables to the left of the identified spelling pattern? And then you run into these strong prefixes. And when you run into a strong prefix, what you need to do is analyze the strong prefix. That gets its own stress, and then the root that it's attached to. And so you're doing an analysis on that. And when learners learn that, and I will tell you, our advanced learners, people who are in the biomedical sciences, oh my goodness, these come up so much. And it was insane how many of these strong prefixes came up. And I have data on strong prefixes. So how often they come up in the data from COCA, and then how often they were spelled. So get this, how often they were spelled in the COCA data with a hyphen and without a hyphen.
Yeah.
Because what I've heard people say is, well, these will usually have a hyphen. And I'm like, well, I have data that looks at this a bit differently. So this prefix will use 70% of the time it appeared with a hyphen, and 30% it did not. And for this one, it's the opposite. And for this one, it's 50-50. So I have charts on this that are included then in Appendix A. And so my goal is then that will be a second article. So I'm going to do one article that's on these word stress rules, so what I talked about today, and then another one that's on the strong prefixes because it came up so much. And then once you put words with strong prefixes into phrases and into dialogue, then you get into do both of those receive stress? Is one of them stressed more? Does the phrase focus syllable go on one of those versus the other? And if it goes on the strong prefix, then there may be a de-stressing of the root. So there are a lot of other things that happen on top of it. So this is where, teaching any of these topics becomes a challenge, and especially when you get into the strong prefixes, we can deal with words in isolation, but then once you put it into actually pronouncing it, then that changes the game. And so I do discuss that in the book. That will be harder to address in a standalone article. It will be kind of one of these, just be careful with this. But we often teach word stress in isolation, but we know we don't use word stress in isolation. So this combination is interesting. But yeah, I'm glad you asked that question because I wanted to get a bit more specific on what those strong prefixes were.
That's a great explanation. And then suddenly it realizes, oh, that's why we have this hyphen indecisiveness, right, in the language, where it's like,
yes,
yeah, re-analyze makes a lot of sense now. That's why we're doing it, because we know intuitively that there is the double primary stress, but we never say that because it contradicts the term primary stress. And so suddenly, got bam, new paradigm. Great, this is brilliant. Thank you.
And another point on that is, so you look at COCA, that's one thing. Then when you look at Uglish, it becomes another thing, because Uglish is a transcript of what was said. So you have someone making a decision when they transcribe these words that include strong prefixes of, have they written it as two separate words? Have they written it with a hyphen? Have they written it without a hyphen? So that's just another interesting thing I'll throw out there. Patrick.
Yeah,
yes.
Thank you so much for your talk, DJ. I'm wondering if you've used Corpora to inform the way you teach segmentals as well, and if so, will that be included in your book? And whether I wonder if you could point me towards some resources that show us the connection between Corpora-informed research and the teaching of segmentals.
So that's a good question. So with teaching segmentals, what I did was when I revised all of my lists, so practice these words. And so I would start with single syllable words because those are easier, and then I go into multisyllabic words. I went through and revised for my multisyllabic words and looked at each of the different stress rules and would try to identify words that had been stressed that they would have learned through the book, and then include those there. So I used this corpus data for my practices, but I wouldn't say that I used it to inform teaching segmentals, but to inform the words that I selected for practice. Colleen.
Yeah, again, thanks so much. I had a question about the new version of the dialogues that you had. I noticed that they might be appropriate for work on contrastive stress. I don't remember exactly, but there are some where you have like neutral, whatever. So I have two questions related to that. The first one then is that, did you recycle or have students revisit those same dialogues when you worked on contrastive stress? That's my first question, and then I'll ask the second one.
Yes, so good question. So in developing practical pronunciation in the dialogues that I use, I'm pretty specific in terms of how what the dialogue does and what's the purpose of it. So you did see one where there's contrastive stress.
Right.
And so that would not appear earlier in the book until they get to that. And so units 2 and 3, which focus on that, we'll get into that. By the end of unit 2, they've gotten through all 4 word stress rules. So I can integrate any of those words, and still they're good words to include, even if they've not learned the word stress rules. You're just going to have to use words as they are. But no, that is a good question. The dialogues are ordered in such a way to do that. And then I also have to account for that when it comes to strong prefixes. And so, yeah, every time you introduce something new about what I call phrase focus syllable, which has so many other words, primary stress, phrase stress, focus stress, but that's the process. And then your other question.
Yeah, and then my second question had to do with prefixes in terms of contrastive stress that will change. So for example, we might say independent or interdependent, but when we're contrasting those, we might say this is independent, whereas that is interdependent. And sometimes I know listening to videos, speakers don't always make that distinction. But I'm just wondering if you also address that perhaps later on in the book.
Yes, that is addressed in the book. So, and that's why I opt for the term phrase focus syllable. So phrase focus syllable, so that people are always thinking about syllable. So there's a syllable that's brought into focus. And so we learn certain, we look in the dictionary, and the dictionary tells us this is where the stress is. But once we put that word in context, we may change the emphasis for one reason or another. And there are multiple examples that look at that, where because of contrast, where we might put it based on word is going to change, and where we might place it based on syllable will change, because there are contrasts with that. I also look at contrast in terms of weak function words. So typically and the are not going to be stressed, but in context, there are times where will be stressed instead of the. And then there's discussion of de-stressing. So after you've got that phrase focus syllable, then de-stressing everything that's after. That becomes really important when you look at words that have strong prefixes, because if you are putting the PFS on that strong prefix, then the root that it's attached to will become de-stressed after it. So there are a lot of things that are in it, and this is where, so kind of getting back to Patrick's question of kind of things of having it on a website. Some of these things, they're set up in such a way where it's ordered, because if you don't order it, it's hard to just distill one thing and say this is this. Right. So while you do have the word stress, that is great, but you always have to put them back into the context where, yes, I've learned where the stress goes, but now you're telling me this word really isn't even going to be stressed because it's appearing after the PFS, and you're not even going to hear it. Mm-hmm. Good questions.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I know you have absolutely wonderful reception from your presentation, DJ. We really appreciate it. If we had more time, we would spend so much more time with you. But I think we will have to follow up with some of that, perhaps online. And you have given us your, your email address. So we have an idea where we might be able to get in touch with you. I also threw into the chat a few items which are about the ways that you could contact us in teaching of pronunciation. And in addition, I'd like to give the mic to Margie for a moment for a call from TESOL for disaster relief. Margie, it's yours.
Hi. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, DJ, for that talk and those great questions, everybody. It was great to hear. I'm just going to, share my screen for a second here and try to pick the right window, because you know me, I've got 100 things open at the same time. So I just wanted to let you all know that TESOL is working to try to support people in Southern California who've been displaced by the wildfires. And so you'll see I just have a little thing up on my Facebook page. I'll put these in the chat. I'll put these links in the chat that that hopefully you all can share with people on your social media, and also you can consider donating. And it links to this page here, which is through the TESOL Education Foundation, which takes tax-deductible donations for TESOL. And we're hoping that you'll be able to support us and to share the information with other people on your social media and various routing lists. So thank you for letting me take some time to just announce that. I'll put a couple of links in the chat. Thanks.
I've dropped some things in the chat for our disaster relief link, so that will be available right now. And once again, I'd like to give a big shout out to DJ. Thank you so much for this awesome presentation. And thank you all participants for being so active listeners and participants in generating interesting questions that help us all better ourselves as teachers and learners. Hope to see you again next month. We'll be doing a presentation on February 21st. Check it out.